Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the third and final pre-Congress session for the 2024 UWC International Congress. My name is Faith Abiodun. It's my privilege to serve as Executive Director at UWC International. Uh, we are streaming across 4 different platforms today, so you might be joining us live either on YouTube, on Facebook, on Zoom, or on the UWC Congress app. Wherever in the world you're joining us from, please type in the chat and share with us where you are and what excites you for this session today. We have exactly 3 weeks to go before we kick off the 2024 UWS International Congress. And over the last 5 months, we've had the privilege of convening several groups of people. We've convened here in a plenary session twice, and this is our third plenary session. It's been a period of sharing lots of lessons, learning together, and shaping the future of education in UWC and beyond. We've heard so far from lots of leaders across the UWC schools and colleges about some exciting curriculum innovations. We've heard from other experienced leaders from the International Baccalaureate from Villas Institute. We've heard from members of the UWC community, our National Committee volunteers in far-flung parts of the world. We've heard from UWC students and alumni who have been showcasing various entrepreneurial solutions to big issues locally and globally. Across various track-specific discussions, we've also been able to listen to great examples, some of the powerful solutions that have been implemented across the 5 tracks of our Congress, around curriculum innovation, around admissions, around well-being, around financial sustainability, and educational leadership and partnerships. We bring all of that together today. We have an opportunity now to place all of our work in context of some real global issues. It's a chance for us to explore the topic of leadership and agency in shaping our rapidly changing world. It is my pleasure now to introduce our moderator for today's session, Ivana Setum. Ivana brings more than 2 decades of experience working with global organizations such as World Affairs Council and Asia Society. Her career has been dedicated to building strategic partnerships for empowering women and youth globally, especially since her own experience as a UWC student a long time ago. Ivana is also a member of the UWC International Council and will be leading us through an exciting discussion with 3 panelists, as well as a group of students from UWC Diligent. Ivana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Faith, and hello to everyone. I know we're going to have a really memorable discussion today with our 3 panelists, because I know, and you can find out too, please check the link in the chat to read their full bios. But our speakers today, Guido, Abby, and Ryan, they truly have the force that we're talking about when we talk about education as a force, because they have the on-the-ground experience to help us better assess and make decisions that can impact the lives of students inside and outside of the classroom. And as a UWC alum, I cherish the opportunity I had and I still have to use my education as a force for good, regardless of the career path that I'm on. And I think I share that with other UWC alum. And just another quick note, after we have the panel discussion, we will have a group of students, UWCers, who are at UWC Dilijan in Armenia, who will tell us about their amazing humanitarian project that started off as an idea and is now an NGO. So on to our panelists. As I mentioned, please check out their bios. You can click the link in the chat. But we have Guido here with us today, Dr. Guido, who is an expert on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're privileged to have somebody that can understand where we came from, where we are, and where we're going when it comes to the SDGs. We have Abby Falik, who's a social entrepreneur. I think nobody knows better what a gap year is, or as she calls it, a purpose year, than her. Having done it herself, she's all about experiential learning. And we have Ryan with us as well, who will shed light on a topic that I know comes up in our work and schools every day, which is AI. How do we leverage AI to continue to make it as a good force for education? So Guido, I'd love to start with you, please. So we know many people are worried today about the plurality of global challenges. And they're interested to know, is there a viable roadmap to peace and sustainable development? So from your vantage point, have the UN SDGs failed? Or is there enough reason to believe that we're on track to meet the ambitious targets that were set 8 years ago? Over to you.
Thank you, Ivana, and it's so great to be here from the UWC global office here in London. The Sustainable Development Goals, just a quick reminder, they were set by all countries in 2015, and that in today's age sounds like a small miracle to get all countries to agree to something. It also was a miracle back then, and it was the result of tireless diplomacy, initiated and led by many countries, because back then, just like today, the basic finding was that the world was not on track to solve some of the really tough and the really important challenges, extreme poverty or poverty in all its forms, including absence or insufficient health, education, lack of access to basic infrastructure, but then also the large environmental challenges, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. Since then, I think it's fair to say that many of these challenges have gotten worse. We've had an extended, continued economic crisis. We've had COVID as a global pandemic. And we're now, it feels like back in the age of big wars, not just in Ukraine, in the Middle East, but also in Sudan, Myanmar, and many other places around the world. We are today not on track to achieving the goals. That is pretty clear. And I think any look at something called the SDG index, if you're interested to see how your country is doing, just put in Google SDG index and you'll find very powerful information that tracks progress by countries and by goals. And the message is stark, is we're not on track. Does that mean that the goals have failed? No. The goals themselves are were just a commitment that countries have made, but we have so far not followed through on the commitments that were solemnly made in 2015. We have not really given it a try. We have let the world descend into war in many places. We have not willed the means. We have not willed the financing that is needed, both public and private. We have not willed the collaboration that is needed. I mean, if we remind ourselves just 3 years ago when the world was in the midst of the COVID crisis, rich countries in particular did not follow through on the need and the request and the feasibility of support for poorer countries by making available, for example, vaccines at more easily and more quickly. So we haven't really given it a try. That's why, and that's what we should do. We should try to meet these goals, and that's of course what the conversation today is about: is how can education be a force for that? What is needed are clear roadmaps. Some of these roadmaps for achieving these goals. How do we get from where we are today towards meeting the goals? Some of these roadmaps exist. We've got fairly clear roadmaps now for the climate challenge. Most countries, certainly all the large ones, have adopted so-called net zero strategies. So strategies for getting towards net zero emissions by 2050, and they now need to be implemented. That requires tireless problem solving. It requires integrated thinking. I'm sure we'll come back to also what it means for education as a force to make these pathways feasible. In other places, we don't have clear pathways. We don't have clear enough pathways for ensuring that every child completes a full cycle of secondary education. And that might seem startling because it is. Education is, of course, a much simpler problem to solve than climate change. Many countries, if not most countries, have or on their path towards reaching universal enrollment and completion in education. Again, I'm talking about primary education here. But there are too many countries where that target feels out of reach today. And we need to mobilize our efforts to develop practical pathways for achieving that simple and essential target that every boy and every girl complete a full cycle of primary and secondary education by 2030. There's nothing impossible here. We have the means. The world is rich enough to afford these goals. There's no question about it. We just have to get down and do the work. So those are some, Ivana, those are some early thoughts to kick us off. Let's please not write off the goals. They are an essential global consensus. let's be honest and recognize that we haven't, as a world community, we haven't really tried to achieve them. And let's double down on what needs to be done and what can be done to get close to these goals, because the objectives that are enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals are the right ones.
Thank you, Dr. Guido. And still got a minute left. So I'd just love to ask you, you said we're not on track, but not all, hope is lost. Would you recommend that going forward, we do away with something like the SDGs and the kind of time frame that, was put? What kind of different framework would you recommend?
No, we shouldn't. We shouldn't do away with the SDGs. In fact, we should start at some point also think about what should come after the SDGs, because humans are capable of achieving amazing things, but it requires organization, shared purpose, and collaboration. All of that requires goals. There's very little that one achieves in life without shared goals. So we need these goals. We should have the goal for every child to complete a full cycle of primary and secondary education. And we have in the past been able, as a global community, to achieve amazing things. Many of you will not remember, some of you are too young for that, but in the early 2000s, AIDS, TB, and malaria seemed like impossible to control, impossible to treat at scale, particularly in poor countries. And that consensus view, also by experts, was shattered by what turned into one of the fastest and most globally consistent campaigns to end TB, AIDS, and malaria. Certainly those diseases are still around. They're no longer a death sentence. And we've seen remarkable progress in some of the poorest countries. And that was the result of global cooperation around these goals, around goals which in those days were called the Millennium Development Goals. We need the same today. And education should be at the center of this all.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to now ask a question to Ryan in your area of expertise. So AI is something we all talk about in and outside of the education sector. But some education practitioners are caught almost flat-footed in understanding its potential and knowing how to integrate the tool in the classroom. So currently, what questions are you encountering the most about AI in education, and how should we consider adapting the delivery of education in this new reality?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me. I think the first question in the first place that a lot of people go is, how do we block it? How do we keep kids from using it? And I really understand that inclination, at least as a starting point. I think that, and there are a lot of good reasons, with so much to be said, there's a lot of good reasons to hold to that position, from the standpoint of practically every model hallucinating, most models being built on top of stolen work, most models not being approved for kids under 18. Those are all valid reasons. And then, of course, there's sort of like the catch-all. Well, also it's cheating. It's sort of this like it's the shortcut to why it's all bad and it's cheating. And I think those are all reasons that are valid and things that are matters of concern that we should talk through. However, in my view, the problem with let's block it and ban it is that it really overlooks the reality that, in my view, AI isn't going anywhere, and quite the contrary, it's going everywhere. In my view, a really good analogy for this moment and AI is the internet in 1995. And so, the internet in 1995, for those of us who used it, you plugged in a phone line and you had to do this long, noisy process of getting connected to something called the internet. And then on it, you could do a very select few things, and you couldn't do them very well. And that to me is AI of today. For all the amazing things that it can do, I think it's still very clunky. I think it breaks, in the sense that it hallucinates and it does things that we don't necessarily approve of. And yet, it, like the internet in 1995, is the worst version of itself that it will ever be. And so if you buy that premise that this is the worst AI that any of us will ever use, I take it a step further and I say, and if that's the case, like the internet, there is no future in which our kids are not actively using AI professionally by the time that they get jobs. And actually, to go a step further, I don't believe there's a scenario in which kids, the youth of today, are not required to use AI adeptly by the time they get into their jobs. Again, just like the internet today, you can't get most jobs today without having some fluency in how does the internet work, and what can you do on it, what can you not do on it. Those are just kind of baseline expectations now of most professionals, whether you're researching cancer or investigative reporter or an academic. The internet is just has infiltrated every major profession, and I think AI is going to be the same. And so if you are still on this, train of thought with me, and you see this as the dial-up internet moment of AI, then I think we have to start to think ahead about what does broadband look like, broadband use, equivalent usage look like for our kids, and how do we start to prepare them for a world of very strong, very ubiquitous AI. And from my point of view, I think one of the best things that we can do for young people in this regard is, instead of saying block it and ban it, we go to the far other end of the spectrum, and we say, how do we make our school a laboratory to actually start to play with AI in a way that is safe, and in a way that is scaffolded, in a way that has equitable access and has effective guardrails. And how do we do it? How do we give kids practice with AI under supervision rather than under the table usage, right? I think that's an important thing. It's a wholesale change, actually, in what is the role of the school in helping kids understand this, and start to build AI skills. And I think, to take it a bit further, I think we have to also give students the chance to use AI in creating work products, because, again, I think that's going to be required of them in their future. And I think when we do that, we start to push students into higher order skills. You may, for anybody following along, some teachers have started to use this where they have AI write the article or an essay, and the students grade it or assess it or critique it. And that starts to look like something that's higher order, and the kind of thing that we're going to be doing more of in the future, in my view. Because when you could just type in a quick prompt and get an answer, then it's like, okay, well, that's a base level starting point. The real high value skills then are when you can say, so what and now what? Based on that answer. And if models over time will stop hallucinating and will start giving better answers, which they will, then that now what, so what, those questions start to become more valuable. And the higher order skills that we've all been trying to build for a long time around critical reasoning and judgment, communication, persuasion, creativity, contextual awareness, those things start to become more and more important. And those are skills I think we should be practicing anyways, not the can you arrive at the right answer kind of calculation, sort of rote memorization questions, which none of us want to do, but have clearly been a part of the system. So I'm not an all AI all the time kind of guy, especially at the younger ages, but I think we do need to think about how do we scaffold AI skills and literacy for our youth. And I think to not do that would be to do our young people a disservice. And that's what I'd suggest students start thinking about. If it's 1995 and you had a sense that this internet thing is going to be huge, what would you do to prepare kids for a world of broadband? And that's kind of the question I'd love to leave everybody with.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And I love the very positive outlook on AI, because I know a lot of people are very skeptical. And I love that you mentioned, we do need to focus on safety, equity, and guardrails, especially when it comes, I think, also to AI ethics and how we deal with DEI when it comes to this topic of AI. So thank you for sharing. And now I'd love to move from AI, from way inside the computer to way outside, to this magical place that's called the gap year or the purpose year, as I know Abby calls it. I myself took one. And so Abby, gap year has been around for a long time, but some still perceive it as a luxury or maybe even a waste of time in the very competitive environment that we're living in. And students have all this pressure, as do parents. So what has inspired you to dedicate so much time to helping to shape the critical inflection point in the lives of young people? And what outcomes have you witnessed over the years?
Thank you, Ivana, and hello, everybody. I'm really honored and delighted to be here. I think my perspective is actually really well aligned with what we just heard from Guido and Ryan, which is in order to shape the young leaders who are going to shape a future that works for all of us, we need to focus on inner development as well. And we need to focus on a set of skills that are hard, if not impossible, to learn in a classroom alone. So I'll just share a little bit about what led me to really a fixation on the transition between high school and what comes next as the most overlooked and most important to leverage opportunity to change a young person's course in their life. And for me, it was growing up in the Bay Area in California and having gone to a competitive academic high school. I can relate well to the experience of the UWCs and feeling like there was such a high expectation on me to conform, check the boxes, to be successful in a very narrow definition of what that meant. And I did all the things. I was a good student, but that was actually my identity. And my sense of purpose was get into college. And by the time I did, and I got into Stanford, I actually felt exhausted. I was disoriented and confused. I felt like underneath all the achievements and the striving, there was a vacuum. And there were deeper questions that my schooling had not been willing to broach. And I felt like I'd learned lots of subjects, except for the one that ultimately I think mattered the most, which was learning more about myself. And rather than following my instinct, which was to take some time off and really sit with these questions about who am I? What does the world need? What am I going to do about it? I felt this momentum. And as you say, Ivana, we call it now FOMO, the fear of missing out, but a fear of getting off track or getting behind. Which I now find so ironic and sad, but it is still the most consistent rationale I get when I talk to young people who desperately want some faith, but who feel like they can't afford to for many reasons. So I spent 2 years on a college campus feeling stifled by learning in lecture halls. And then I took off and spent a year living and working in Latin America on my own, not enrolled in school in any formal capacity, but having the kinds of experiences that actually lit my fire, that gave me more clarity about what gets me up in the morning when there's no alarm clock, who I am when nobody's watching, what issues break my heart that I can't look away from. And so when I came back to school, I felt not burnt out, but on fire with a sense of these are my burning questions. And my mission became exactly this. How do we help young people approach the next chapter of their lives, not fixated on how to define a major in an academic context, but actually how to define their life purpose and a mission? And this idea that we're giving kids roadmaps for a prior era, and what they actually need is a compass that helps them define their direction without giving them directions. And so ever since, I have been focused on how do we reinvent that transition from childhood to adulthood, dependence to independence, the moment that religions and cultures around the world have for generations understood could be a rebellious rite of passage. And yet we're overlooking it in this hustle to get to some amorphous finish line that doesn't actually even exist.
Thank you so much, Abby, for sharing that. And I too, during my gap year, found my purpose, and that is exactly what led me to decide to work in the nonprofit world and use education for good. If I hadn't had it, I don't know, it might have taken a much longer time to figure that out. So yeah, we really need to give students that opportunity and time and space. So thank you, Abby. And now I'd love to go again to Guido. So our work in education is to prepare the next generation to not just thrive individually in an ever-changing world, but to demonstrate personal responsibility and leadership. So what changes would you like to see in education today to strengthen your belief in the possibility of an ever-improving world?
That's a very good question. I mean, if we go back to what we, to the things that we've heard, we've spoken about AI, we've spoken about the Sustainable Development Goals. To make the best use of these technological marvels, AI, and to avoid some of the really bad things that could happen, but also to solve the problem of climate change. But by that we mean that every country has to get to net zero emissions, and we have to learn to adapt to a world that last year was 1.5 degrees Celsius over the pre-industrial average. In order to solve these problems, we need massive problem solving, and that sounds like a very banal thing to say, but it is really, really important, because we don't know, we don't have a playbook that is easy to implement to deploy renewable energies at a scale that's required. It requires better technologies. It requires figuring out how to finance these things in poor countries. I was just in Namibia, where the government wants to deploy renewable energy at much larger scale, but it doesn't have access to the financing because the cost of capital is too high. So how do you solve for that? We need scientific advances. We need the social sciences. We need to figure out how to transition an economy without undermining the livelihoods of the poorest and the weakest in a society. That's something that affects every country. In Europe, we've got farmers' protests now because the farmers are suffering, in parts from climate goals. All of these are very, very complex challenges that require technologies, policies, new business models, financing, stakeholder engagement, and education needs to prepare future leaders for this. That, I think, requires a different education to the one that I enjoyed when I went to Atlantic College too many years ago. I would emphasize 4 shifts. Number 1 is we need to move from knowledge to skills. When I went to school, the internet barely existed. Today, it's everyone's mobile phone gives you access to phenomenal tools, and we've heard from Ryan that today's AI is the worst that we'll ever experience, but it's pretty damn good for some basic tasks. And so education needs to focus much less on conveying knowledge, but equipping people to problem solve. How do we do that? That's my second point. Is we need to move towards much more systemic, integrated approaches, and that really requires us moving away from just conveying knowledge towards a problem-based approach and a solution-focused mindset. Yes, of course, we do need to learn the basics of science, of chemistry, physics, mathematics, and everyone should, as we do for the humanities and the social sciences. But today's world cannot, and the problems that you encounter in working on these challenges, as I and many others do every day, they are too integrated and too systemic to be addressed through the disciplines that we've had that we have been taught so far. So that's the systemic approach, and it should really start by looking at specific problems. This is something that Dutch universities, for example, have pioneered. They've shifted their pedagogical model entirely towards problem-based learning, and the results are absolutely astounding. My daughter studies there, so I have a bit of a first-hand view on this, and I really recommend it as a case study. Third, and this is all related, we need much more teamwork-based study and work, because that is the reality in the work world today. None of these problems can be solved by smart people sitting in a room. The era where a single person like Albert Einstein can sit in his study and transform the world through his brilliance, in this particular case, that world is almost over. All the challenges we now face are too complex, too multifaceted, and so we need teamwork. And fourth is, and this is really important, we need a solutions-focused mindset. It is important to have critical thinking, but somebody who just critiques is of no use to me professionally. Critical thinking comes with a deeper understanding of the issues. It comes critically with through careful work on devising solutions and working through them. And by that I mean getting other people on board to work with you on solving a solution. So yes, please be critical, but most importantly, pick a topic, be it the energy transition, be it the move towards sustainable land use and food systems, be it tackling inequalities, and think through what are integrated solutions that actually are feasible and can be implemented. That is extremely powerful. All of this is, and this is Abby, where I really I love what you said about the experiential side of a gap year. All of this is best done by actually working on specific concrete issues. And so my vision also for education, for particularly for UWC education, is that we need to find ways to connect students much sooner, much earlier, to the practice of working on climate change, on providing access to education, tackling some of the most pernicious infectious diseases, and many other examples that we've touched on. And I think this is possible. This is possible through modern technologies. This is possible through a vastly greater alumni network that we have than when I went to the school. And it's above possible by something that unites all of us, which is the belief in the importance of tackling these issues, but most importantly also the power not just of education, but of our collaboration to make a real dent in these challenges. For that reason, I'm very inspired by what's happening at Atlantic College, which has taken it upon itself to reform the IB by replacing 2 IB subjects with an experiential learning component. I applaud that effort. I would urge other UWCs to follow this course, charting their own approaches. But I just leave us with one challenge that I want to put out to this group: is the UWC group and movement is very, very privileged. We've got access to phenomenal students. We actually do have quite access to phenomenal resources as well. And it's upon us to help other schools benefit from the resources that we have. And so I urge Atlantic College and the UWC movement to make our experiential and our education innovation a public good, make it open source, share it. And those technologies exist today. Many of you on the call will know far better than I ever would. I'm too old for this, how to harness and how to master them. But that, I think, is a challenge that I would really put out to the movement as a whole.
Thank you, Dr. Guido. And that is a great thing to end on, because it transitions to where I think Ryan can share his expertise. So, Ryan, your career has been working at the intersection of education and leadership development in secondary education, higher education, as well as with senior executives. So what is most needed for young people to embrace the responsibility of leadership, and how can that be introduced through schools?
Yeah. Well, first, I love what Dr. Guido said. Great answer. And, if we just do that, we'll be in great shape. And I have so many thoughts that I'd love to add here, but I think the one I'd love to impress upon everybody, I think, is that I'd like to pick on the schools as being the entity that has most held kids back from taking on the mantle of leadership. And that, I know, is not necessarily a popular opinion, but let me unpack it for a second. I think we have to take a long, hard look, and this isn't, I'm not talking about UWC. I'm not familiar with all the programs within UWC, so I'm not picking on anybody, but writ large, I think we have to look at what we in education and various school leadership bodies have really come to emphasize and incentivize in schools. And I think if we take an honest look at it, we've historically prized grades and test scores. We have top student awards, we have valedictorians, we have salutatorians. And one way or another, all these things sort of work together to tell kids, this is what success looks like. Good grades, high test scores, great placements in SATs and ACTs and things like that, Cambridge exams, et cetera. And some schools, they're telling kids subtly and maybe not so subtly, hey, you need to sacrifice other things like athletics, extracurricular activities, even wellness and health to get those things, to get the good grades, to get the good placements that come from them. And meanwhile, and at the same time, we are rarely recognizing and commending kids for the things that are happening outside the classroom and those things that are coming out of a kid's area of interest or just some passion thing that they're working on. You're far more likely to hear about little Johnny getting A stars and high test scores than you are to hear about Johnny starting a peer mentoring club, raising money for a new basketball court for a school that doesn't have the funds, or Johnny, like, I don't know, hassling school administration to source more sustainable food in the dining hall. These are not things that you're very likely to hear about relative to grades, right? And so I think we have to look at what have we incentivized, what have we prized, and ask ourselves, are we getting anything different than what we're putting our chips behind? And I think we're not. I think we're largely getting good grades and high test scores, or at least that being the aspiration, because that's what we're all prizing. And so I think we have to take a bigger look at what are the things that we're rewarding and awarding in schools. And I think that we have to ask ourselves, have we properly valued non-academic performance? Have we valued leadership development or leadership practice in our schools and in our school spaces? And also, have we maybe start to set it as an expectation that, hey, we don't just want you to be good students, but we want you to be young people who create impact. And to do that, you need these other skills, like Dr. Guido was saying, these leadership skills and this leadership practice. Really, we need these. Again, I'll talk about laboratories. I love education as a laboratory, but these laboratories where students can actually start to apply themselves and practice leadership and say, hey, what do you care about? What does the world need? Okay, go try some things in a safe space. We'll be here to help you and support you. And I know there's some UWC students who are going to talk to us about that, and I'm really excited because this is exactly what I'm talking about. When young people can turn their attention to these things and they have the space and the backing to do that. And I think them being here, them getting the spotlight is exactly the right thing that should be happening writ large, because it starts to show everybody else, oh, it's not just about A's or fives or whatever the mark is. It's about doing things that have an impact in the world. And so I would just add one more point to that, which is to say that I think if you believe what I was saying earlier about AI being this absolute disruptor, then I think we have to totally rethink what the school is going to be about. What is the unique value add of a school such that parents would want to send their kids, into this machine or this building for 12 years or even 2 years? And I think for me, that when I think about the kind of school that I want my daughter to have, I think it's a school that it's not so concerned with the answers that they get. It's about concerned about what they do with them and about sort of the application and the impact of easy answers. But what does that look like in the real world? And they're getting this holistic human development where they can work together, where they can be creative, where they can practice being persuasive and communicating and actually making use of these more easily gotten answers. And I want our kids to be in a space where they're thinking about how do they make this world more ethical, sustainable, equitable, clean, fair. That's what I want students, in my view, that's what I think students should be focused on every day, rather than can they get a right answer. So that's what I'd love to invite people to think about.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And I know at UWC, we have Project Week, and we are constantly given the opportunity to work on projects and take them, outside of school. And I agree with you. I wish we could have that at every school. And even more so, I wish everybody could go on a gap year, like you did recently, Abby. I know you personally traveled with your husband and 2 kids. I know because I followed you on LinkedIn. And I guess whenever you had internet in Western Nepal, the kingdom of Mustang, you could share some photos from your experience. And I know you also spent some time in Thailand at UWC. So what have you learned differently in recent times that is shaping your current thinking about enabling agency and leadership in young people?
Great. Well, I feel my energy rising hearing Guido and Ryan speak about what's possible and what's needed. And then on the heels of this really transformative experience that I've had over the last year. My husband and I both found ourselves in transitions. We've had the tremendous opportunity to, in my view, practice what I had been preaching for so long, which was there's power in creating a window in time between one job and the next, one stage of life and the next. What happens when we leave our comfort zone, ask bigger and fresh questions, find teachers in unexpected places, have the kinds of experience that shape us on a more cellular, foundational level. And for me, it was a moment to come back to those core questions that had guided me all along and had supported thousands of global citizen year fellows through the years, which were, who am I? What does this world need? And what am I going to do about it? So we enrolled our boys in local schools around the world. And one of those experiences was the UWC in Thailand, which was just an extraordinary experience. Having worked with so many UWC alums through the year, to actually be on campus really just brightened my enthusiasm for the model, but it also got me thinking much bigger. So I think to connect the dots on this conversation about what kind of learning is needed now, what are the skills, not just the sort of intellects we need to fill, but there's something about intuition, right? We're training kids to be smart, but not necessarily wise. There's such limit to what can happen in the classroom. And we're still teaching to the test, as Ryan said, that the AI in my pocket can class in seconds. So what is the purpose of school and learning in a context where we have all the answers? And I think it needs to be about helping us frame new, fresh, and better questions, and the comfort and confidence to sit in the ambiguity of the not knowing, not needing to race to the answer, but actually valuing that the question has potency. And so what emerged from this year of exploration for us was a new vision that I hope will meet this moment with what's possible. And it's really the idea of taking these learning models that are really still at the fringes, whether it's the Waldorf or the experiential learning models or a United World College framework and the IB. How do we actually recognize the brilliance that was embedded so long ago in those learning models and recognize the opportunity we have to create public good of them? So if we were to create any of those models from scratch today, or if we were to reinvent the university today, it would look nothing like what it looks like now. And so what's inspiring me right now is a vision for a new entity, a new organization that I'm beginning to build that we're calling the Flight School. It's deeply influenced by the UWC model and my experience recognizing that transition after high school is when everything changes in terms of your values, identity, and the sense of your compass. And so at the Flight School, we're creating something that will be unbounded by an actual campus and not bounded in time. So there's a recognition that learning needs to be lifelong. It shouldn't just be crammed up against the first quarter of our life. So we're going to blow the walls and the ceiling off of all of that and create a platform that invites extraordinary young people from all walks of life, from every corner of the earth, to opt in after high school for what we're calling a launch year. It's the experience that helps you design and direct your own learning over the course of that year. And we scaffold it with a cohort, with coaching, with courses that you take. And it's not just about that year, it's actually a lifelong journey. So it's the recognition that once you begin, you are a part of the Flight School for life. Kids are scrambling heads down, chasing goals that make often less sense. And what's needed is this more expansive sense of altitude, perspective, a broader sense of your own identity and sense of civic obligation, not just for the kids on your campus or in your community, but actually, we're all on the same team on this planet, and we just don't necessarily realize it yet. So we have a very audacious vision for what this can look like. And ultimately, the idea is to create a generation of young leaders who have what we're calling the real skills, REAL, that get us from the 21st century to the 22nd. And real, and I'll just share this in case it's a helpful framework for others, for us stands for resilience, empathy, agency, and leadership, where leadership is not an arrival point, a title, or a salary. Leadership is a lifelong practice. And it begins as soon as you know your power to impact and influence the conditions around you. And it can start at any age. But in my view, if we could harness the idealism of Gen Z and orient them around a clear purpose and equip them with these real skills, we've got a shot at redefining what those SDGs look like in the next era, and working together on goals that really will help us not just survive, but thrive.
Thank you, Abby, so much for sharing. And now it's time to take some questions from the audience. And so also thank you to Guido and thank you to Ryan so far. And we have one question, and Abby, you were just kind of touching on it. So maybe I'll start back with you and we'll go backwards, and then Ryan and then Guido. So it's a question from Jason McBride, from the head of Pearson College in Canada, UWC. What are the 2 to 3 skills you wish all young people were explicitly taught? So I know you just mentioned some, but please elaborate, and had a chance to practice while at UWC in order to have an impact during and after their time with us.
Well, I mean, it's not going to surprise you that my answer comes back to experiential learning, and I'll just zero in on, again, these real skills that we're talking about. Resilience, rebounding from failure, and knowing that you can continue on and not being too afraid to take risks and fail, but to actually have the inner groundedness that allows you to think outside the box and to not just conform, but to be more broad and creative in your thinking. Empathy, connecting across different, which obviously the UWC do so beautifully, and agency to design your own path and your own learning, to recognize that, I have this sticky that is on my computer when I open it in the morning. It says, if the path is clear, you're on someone else's. And to me, we need to usher in an age of agency if we're actually going to create a counterforce to this age of AI and automation. And so what it can look like is a lot of what you described, Ivana, but I know many of the UWCs incorporate experiential learning. The invitation I would put out to everybody here today is, I'd love to see an encouraged, if not required, 3rd year of the United World College experience that sends young people who've had this extraordinary education on a campus somewhere in the world out into the world, so that it's not just learning the theory and practicing it in this contained environment, but that it's actually the continuation, the natural next step. I worked with so many United World College grads at Global Citizen who would say they wish that a year of experiential learning, of putting the theory into practice, was actually a required next step. And so that's the call I'll put out to this group, and explicitly say that if you're interested in what we're describing at the flight school, we'll be launching a pilot this year, and very hopeful that the UWCs will be foundational in helping us refine and test and build the model.
Thank you, Abby, so much. And Ryan, if you could share what 2, 3 skills would you pick?
Yeah, I love those. I think I love what Guido said about problem solving, and I think resourcefulness is a great one, because you're not always going to be given all the resources that you need to address things, but by being scrappy and having to creatively problem solve and oftentimes do so on the fly. I think that's one of the most powerful things. If I could point to anything from my own story, I think I was able to do in hard moments was just be resourceful and figure things out when it wasn't clear, because that's the kind of thing that if you can learn it on a small scale, then I think that translates to a much broader scale. And I also think, I have a business background, and I come in between business and education quite a bit. I really think understanding, you don't have to be an entrepreneur, you don't have to be a business person, but I think really understanding how the business side of the world works, I think is important. And I imagine, I don't want to necessarily say emphatically, but I would bet that that's been important to Guido's work and what would be behind the SDGs working. A lot of times I heard him say it's a matter of finance in a lot of cases. And so I think people having a base level understanding of how does money work in the world, and how do things like funding, finance and interest rates, how those things impact what's possible. You don't have to be a business major to do it. I think, a good couple weeks or months of study could help give you a nice leg up. But for me, that's something that I think oftentimes young people miss in their kind of big ideas and big hopes and dreams, but I think is something that will make things go or not go at the end of the day. So that's another one that's a little bit off the beaten path that I would recommend.
Thank you, Ryan. Yes, and I'm right there with you in my work with specifically high school girls. We focus a lot on financial literacy, exactly what you just said. And when they go through programs like that, they all say, "I wish I had that at high school." So yeah,
I
it's
know. That's great.
yeah, critical skill. And Dr. Guido would love to pass it on to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm going in a similar direction as Abby and Ryan. This is about practicing problem solving. This is not something that you teach. It's something you learn by practicing it. So what I would encourage schools like the UWC to do is to get groups of students to engage with practitioners in fields that they're of interest: climate, mitigation, adaptation, disease, education. You pick your topics. And it doesn't matter whether this is a very local problem, and in order to find problems, to identify what are the practitioners grappling with, and these can be problems that operate at a local level. How do you get a community to agree whether and where to place a wind turbine, for example, because it all involves trade-offs. Or they can operate at national, regional, national, global scales. And then I would encourage groups of students supported by their teachers, but this is not, again, not something you teach, to sort of engage in a process of problem solving by thinking through what is the path to success, agreeing it, and then engaging with practitioners and stakeholders to get them on board. Because the challenge that I've encountered, and that people who, for example, join my company encounter, is that the typical answer to a new proposal, a solution that you propose, is no. People seem to specialize in finding and focusing on the reasons why something doesn't work. And these things are all complicated. So the real skill that people need to learn and need to acquire through practice, in my experience, is to, first of all, think through the optimal design of a solution that addresses business questions, addresses social questions, anthropological questions of acceptability. Things that work in Italy may not work in the UK because these countries, the cultures are very different. Things that are and solutions that are technologically feasible, and you only do that by engaging very broad range of stakeholders. But then to convince and to engage people and to convince them to get off their fence and to engage in applying the solution. This is a method of problem solving that is highly iterative. It's highly team-based. It is mind-bogglingly complex because every time you speak to a new person, you find a new facet of complexity. But similarly, you also find new elements of what the kernel of the solution might be. And I would encourage schools to create the opportunities for these processes. I think it's important not to make them theoretical, too abstract. That's why I would always start with engaging practitioners on trying to find out what is it you're grappling with. I've seen this operate in many instances, and the benefits in terms of opening people's minds, broadening the horizon, but then really learning critical elements of how to work together to solve complex problems. Those benefits can be amazing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guido. And we're getting questions in, and I think we have time for 3 more. So these will be specific questions for specific panelists. We have a question from Anthony Tong, chair of UWC Hong Kong, and it's a question for Ryan. So Ryan, what's most frightening about AI is that most of the learning is not incorporating the ethical considerations. It's like teaching everyone how to make an atomic bomb without giving them the full horrors. What role should educators play in supporting students in navigating potentially unethical uses of AI?
Yeah, I mean, this is 100% true, and one of the smartest thinkers on AI that I've encountered is a guy named Mustafa Suleyman. He's written a book called The Coming Wave, and he puts forth a pretty scary scenario where the natural end of AI is that anybody could say, create a biological weapon, and it just laid out for them how that could, any person could just be like, I'd like to create something that, does X, and it's just laid out for them. And, he's sort of says, do we want that sort of free for all, or do we want government regulation? And he kind of just poses it as an open question. And I think that's important thinking that everyone should engage with. But to the point, Anthony's point, yeah, like this is where this is headed. And, if we think of it like a weapon or just even a car, those things in the right context can do good things. In the wrong context, in the wrong hands, without the proper training, they can do all sorts of wrong things and bad things and scary things. And so I think we do have to approach this thing with some reverence and also a sense of urgency. Whenever I hear school leaders talk, I hear a stunning lack of urgency about coming to terms with what this thing is and what it's going to mean for ourselves and for the world to come. And I just think that given this is kind of the teleological end of where this heads, we don't know how long that takes, but I would rather us all have some skills and some language, some reasoning around when and how and to what extent to use AI before we get to the really scary part. Now it's just, I'm not saying it's just, but it's pictures and it's half wrong answers and things like that. And nobody's using it to nobody's really weaponizing it to a great degree yet. The average person, at least. I want us to have the conversation about how do we start thinking about getting training wheels or good just training into people's hands before we get to the scary part. And I hope everybody here will kind of approach that with a sense of urgency, because we don't know how long that reality, how far out that is, but it's not coming. And I think we have to address it, and we have to get serious about it now, not when we can see it around the horizon. This stuff, the way it computes and the way it grows, it's like, it's doubling every so many months. And when that's the case, it could be even more than doubling. Actually, it's probably exponential. We don't always know what how fast these things go. We're bad at understanding exponential growth as humans. So I think we have some sense of it now. Let's start talking about it today. And even if we're wrong, even if we're one quarter right, I don't want us to not have talked about it and addressed it at this point.
Thank you, Ryan. And I see in the chat there was some conversation about how we should not be leaving it up to the tech companies, and it's up to us educators to set those guardrails. So thank you for that. And now I have a question for Abby, also coming from Hong Kong, Wendy Tai. So Abby, as an educator, I would love to promote holistic development beyond academics, but the reality is that universities want the grades. This limits schools' resources to guide students outside of grades. What can we do when faced with this challenge?
Such a challenge. And I think we both have to be working within the system and looking up to recognize that the system is breaking us in so many ways. I think, and I imagine if you're even asking the question, obviously you are thinking about ways to motivate kids around what intrinsically motivates their interest and drives them forward. I mean, my work is so much about envisioning what's possible and helping to nudge the world in that direction. So imagining there's a movement in the US, I don't know if UWC has been involved in any way, but around reimagining the high school transcript away from grades and toward this notion of mastery. It's called the Mastery Transcript Consortium. And it would be worth checking out, because what they've done is create a rubric for assessing skills and competencies. And they're actually beginning to work with colleges as well to help them see the short-sightedness of focusing on these very narrow measures that actually don't say much beyond how well you performed in an academic context. And my hope and perspective on this is that over time, we can all come to a much more holistic understanding of what it means to be prepared for higher education in whatever form that takes. And increasingly, my kids are now 7 and 9, and I think it's unlikely they're going to go to college in the traditional way that I have experienced it. I think we're on the verge of, somebody just described it as a Cambrian explosion of new forms of higher education. But again, to Guido's point, this idea of a public good, the learning, the content, the information of it, is all can be democratized immediately. So what is the purpose of the coming together and some kind of campus-based experience? And my hope is that that helps us move away from these more narrow measures toward things that are more holistic and more durable indications of learning how to learn, of being curious, conscientious, courageous. So bringing that into the classroom and helping to scale back the anxiety that kids feel that there's only one pathway to success and only one sort of point of arrival that counts, I think is a key piece.
Thank you so much, Abby. And like you, I think often about what university will look like. I have a 2 and a 5-year-old, and I just can't imagine that it will be the same when their time comes. All right. And we have one more last question, and it's for Guido, Dr. Guido. How to educate our children to meet the SDGs, thereby creating a better world? The answer lies in empathy. To steer our future leaders away from profit as the overreaching goal. How do we teach empathy?
Sorry, now I'm muted. It's a very good question because I've and some of us have spoken a lot about some of the technical issues, and we've heard about businesses, technologies, business models, how to get people to sit down together. That's important, but it is not enough. And in a work environment, it is not always the people who have the biggest IQ and the best grades in school who do best. It's often those who have great skills, but then also have the empathy and the emotional intelligence to work with others. Because as I said at the outset, the Einsteins of this world will not change our trajectory towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to work together, and that's something that's learned very early on. I'm not an expert on how to educate children. I think my 2 children will say that I've perhaps done some things right, but I've also done lots of things wrong. So I'm not here to be able to, I'm not the one to give you the answer. What I've always found powerful in my own upbringing, and what I've tried to do with my children, is to first and foremost convey a sense of belonging and ownership. The challenges and the opportunities we see, we're all part of, and we own them. It's not just pointing at somebody else to say, hey, this or that problem should be fixed. It is our responsibility, even if we don't have the levers of power or the means at our disposal to act at the scale that's required individually. I think it's up on us to think through what might a solution look like. It's up on us to be part of that thinking process, and that's where, for me, empathy starts to be connected to something like the Sustainable Development Goals. Because it would be easy to say, what can I do to help ensure that every kid completes a full cycle of primary and secondary education, and that will not get you to engage. And so what I find much more exciting, personally also rewarding, and I've seen young people, perhaps even my children, but they're not listening, to engage in, is the question of what should happen, what would need to happen in order to do that. And that's something which I've cherished from my UWC education, because we're all thrown together from all parts of the world. And when something happened, good or bad, in one part of the world, there was always somebody who was personally touched, and it instilled in us all the sense of these problems, we're all connected to them. With 1 or 2 degrees of separation, and that's what I try to inculcate in younger people I have an opportunity to engage with, including my children. And that's where, for me, the empathy starts. These are not abstract goals; these are very practical. They're real people's lives behind underpinning them. They're real people's lives that have to be improved, and we can get there if we work together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guido. And I'd love to thank all the 2 other panelists, Abby and Ryan, for your insights. And with everything that you've said, we now have a real life example of students who have these skills and who are making change and who are thinking locally and globally, like we do at UWC. And I just want to share that exactly a year ago at this time, I was on a selection panel for the Young Aurora Prize. And I read about 15 proposals, which were like 15 different pitches from across the UWCs. And I remember reading the Kombili project. And so I'm thrilled to meet you guys here today. And it's amazing. Congratulations. You had an idea and you took action and you're now an NGO, and we'd love to hear about it. Please take it away, guys.
Hi. Thank you so much, Ivana. It's wonderful to join the conversation with Kombili. My name is Alda Aflatuni. I'm from Finland. I'm a second-year student here at UWC Dilijan.
Yeah, I'm Jake Gates and I'm from Wales and I'm also a second-year student here.
Hi, I'm Patrick. I'm from Poland and I'm a first-year student in Dilijan.
So we're all from the Kombili student-led NGO working here in Armenia, and we just want to share a little bit about the steps we took with our project. So Kombili started a few years ago with the realization that, places like these right here that you see in this picture should not exist. And this is Armenia's biggest landfill. It's called Nubarashen landfill. And it's right at the outskirts of Armenia's capital, Yerevan. And actually, after visiting it last autumn and, having like this smell of waste stuck on your clothes for weeks after, it was a very humbling experience. We realized that what we want to do with Kombili is actually we're trying to tackle one of the biggest issues of our generation, which is that by 2050, air pollution is going to become the biggest issue, is going to become the leading cause of premature deaths worldwide. So we did a lot of research into this question. We interviewed local families. We did some surveys, and we actually found out that half of all of the waste that we throw away is bio-waste. And so that's how bio-waste kind of became our entry point into this sustainability question. And over the past year and a half, we've been testing 3 key elements that are a part of Kombili. So we're going to be telling about those elements and how we've been testing them. And they are composting in the city environment, community engagement through collective garden building, and most importantly, education.
Oh, there we go. So this is our Kombili tumbler, which is the most effective way that we can transform household bio-waste into soil, sort of on the community and local level. So we had initial seed funding from the Embassy of Finland here in Armenia to build our first Kombili tumbler. And this was sort of a DIY tumbler we built ourselves out of old recycled barrels, which is currently being used now by a small community in Yerevan, where we're doing work with the community centre now. And since winning the Young Aurora Prize, we used some of the grant money from there to build our second improved model, which is made out of metal and has insulation and is a bit more durable. And we're currently testing that here on campus at UWC with the primary school here. And you can see us in the photo rocking the new tumbler. The next slide.
One of the other aspects of Kombili, as Alda said, is education. And in the beginning, we faced a challenge. How can we present the knowledge about composting and recycling in a captivating for kids way? Because, kids won't listen to lectures and you just pouring information of them. So we faced the challenge. And one of the results that we came up with was the unique, kind of a bizarre at first idea of a trash patrol, of us actually going to these children's houses and searching for their trash and actually showing them by their example that, the bio-waste is a large part of the whole waste gathered in their homes, and showing them that, hey, by composting, you can actually make an impact. By giving them that hands-on experience, we actually engaged them, and the kids became inspired to actually compost. And it's not just the knowledge that we gave them, but we built the sense of community And now they are passionate and self-aware of why it is needed to recycle and compost, and they know what they are gonna do in the future and how they're gonna develop this educational idea to be planted inside of them in the early stages of their lives.
Yeah, so to add on a little bit to that, it's all about sort of a mindset change, because you can put compost bins, tumblers all around the world, and even in Armenia, who have very limited recycling facilities, but the wider community are not going to use them unless they're educated on why it's so important. So we recently attended a big conference in Yerevan unveiling new recycling bins, where they're starting to promote the 3 R's of recycling now in Armenia, about 50 years behind other countries, but it's great to see this is moving forward. So to move on a bit further, we spoke at the International Baccalaureate Global Conference in Dublin to over 1,500 educators about what they should do to help young people's projects thrive. Because one of the biggest challenges we've had with the Konbili project is adults taking our ideas seriously and sort of being on the same level as them, and actually with them believing in us. And we wanted to share the message to all these educators that if you don't let us take risks, we're not going to learn. And even if you think that we're going to fail, they should let us do that, because actually from failure is when you learn the most.
So what is the next step? What's going to happen next with Konbili? Actually, only about 2 days from now, we are kickstarting a whole new Konbili action program in Yerevan, which consists of 4 major workshops. They're like kind of like workshop days in which we're engaging these 10 to 15-year-old youth to test these different elements of Konbili. And the whole kind of 4-step workshop will culminate in this idea we have, which is the 48-hour challenge, where we're actually challenging our neighborhood and all the stakeholders there, including the Yerevan city who are supporting us, as well as the families who are engaged in the composting process, to build a small-scale Konbili garden. So we also challenge all of you to join us in this 48-hour challenge. And basically, in a nutshell, Konbili recognizes that environmental change can only happen through behavior change. And what we've been learning about is that this can only happen when youth are taking the lead, and youth are also inspiring, and especially children too. Youth and children are inspiring their parents and the older generations to actually like join this, movement and change their habits into new ones. So you can follow our project on our social media. Our name on Instagram is the Konbili. And yeah, please feel free to ask questions and support.
Thank you so much for sharing with us about your project. It's really an incredible journey. And you guys are doing this while you're, doing IB. So that alone is an accomplishment. I have a question for you guys about, when you think of potentially scaling this idea, going local to global, as you mentioned from the beginning, this is a global problem. So are there some global partners that you are working with and sharing best practices? What kind of plans do you guys see for further down the line?
Yeah, I think I can take this question. So as part of the Konbili concept, with the 3 elements which have already been proven, bringing them together, we want to captivate that to be shared all around the world and be replicated by different schools, organizations, clubs. So the whole idea of our model is to put it all on a website, which we've already started working on, which is konbili.org. So as part of that, we want other schools, other communities. So when we have this final model of what the education should be, what the garden components of the garden is key to success, once we've done it here, then it can be replicated in communities all around the world. And that's how we look at scaling it up.
So we're also looking at like shooting videos of us doing these different workshops, especially with this new 4-step workshop thing happening. And then those videos can, of course, be shared, and we'll make them into like step-by-step, guides, so that other schools and other cities can possibly see how, throughout these workshops, we created, we started with education, we started with creating this awareness of the issue, then we went into the practical components, building these different elements of the garden, including the tumbler and the plant boxes, and engaging the community together with the children, what that looked like. And then finally, you know, putting them all together to this like physical garden space. So I think, you know, piloting it here, especially in Yerevan, which is like a very polluted city, and it's a very good example of a city that's actually struggling with this issue of air pollution and waste management. That can prove to other cities that, you know, this can happen anywhere. Yeah.
Thank you. And we've got another question. So whilst you've set up an NGO, how will you ensure success beyond your college years?
Yeah, I mean, so we've set up an environmental, non-governmental organization in Armenia. And as part of the project, because we're only here for 2 years, myself and Elder are graduating in 3 months. I think it's 100 days today. Like we want to make as much of an impact here as we can before we leave, but we also want the continuation of the project. And we want this to be done through our wonderful first years. So as part of our project, we have converted it into sort of a CAS at the same time. And we've recruited about 5 first years onto the project, who the NGO will be passed down to, and all the accounts, to hopefully maintain the flow of Konbili in the long term, and look at expanding to more gardens in Yerevan, and like keeping the upkeep of the website and things like that.
And of course, as alumni, we're going to be, I mean, wherever we go, this project, we can take it with us and we can restart it there. And we'll have so much knowledge from how we did it here that I think it's something that, you know, we can replicate in our new cities wherever we go. So yeah.
Thank you guys so much. A little bit of, you know, question, kind of what I mentioned earlier. You are, you know, doing your IB, and we know it's very rigorous and demanding. So how are you finding balance between working on your Konbili project and your academics?
Sure, I can go, because I feel like by, you know, perspective of a first year might differ a little bit from the second year, because as we said, like, you know, that's why we recruited. I think that's what was the intention of the second years, to recruit the first years, because in our first year we have a little bit more free time with not the final exams looming from outside, and the IAs, EEs, all those deadlines. So we are slowly trying to take on the initiative with the support and the knowledge that the second years are passing on to us. But I also feel like if you are truly passionate about something, and having this Konbili that, you know, as Alda said, this experience from the very beginning, that we really want to change something, that we see the impact of what we are doing, because we have a Tumblr, our school, that's used by the primary school students. We are conducting workshops. That's a really rewarding thing. And, you know, you always make those choices. You can either spend, you know, some time in your room, for example, watching a movie, or you can actually go to Yerevan and conduct some workshops. So we are trying, you know, of course, to balance the academic free time with our passion for Konbili, but it is possible. If you are willing to do so, everything is possible. And I feel like, you know, it's just a key. How do you build up those components?
I love our firsties. They're so positive. And I think you guys are our hope. No, I totally agree with Patrick, but I think also it has been really, really difficult, because it does take a lot of time. We're an NGO, we're commuting between cities, we're planning workshops all the time. And with all of that, you know, there's this hope that you have that like teachers would understand that, you know, this is also important. And actually what I'm learning in your class, I'm trying to also use in this project. And I wouldn't want to have like, sometimes it feels like there is this kind of dichotomy that like, do I put effort into, you know, getting good grades, or do I plan this workshop for Konbili? And I think that is an unhealthy like contrast, because we are actually, what we're learning here in UWC, we've come here with our experiences from different countries, and our experiences, very different life experiences. And I think the point is that we'd be able to use those experiences in our everyday life here together with other students. So, so kind of, I think we still need to figure out how can we incorporate like action, social action into like that study life.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for being so honest. I think this is great validation for the need of a third year after the 2 years of doing IB at UWC, so that we can do exactly these kinds of projects. So thank you so much for sharing with us. So that wraps up my time here with introducing the panelists and the Kombili project. So thank you so much. And I will pass it now to Enya.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivana. So if you're a Congress delegate, hopefully you're joining us via the official Congress app, either on your desktop or on your phone. This will be the space to navigate all Congress sessions and see your Congress schedule, whether you're an online or in-person delegate in Thailand. Now that the pre-Congress sessions are complete, the full Congress program will be available on the app next week. On the app, you'll also find all the essential resources needed to prepare for Congress, as well as spaces to connect and network with other delegates and to have conversations outside of the incredible workshops and plenaries. Please update your profile on here and feel free to make yourself visible so that others can find and connect with you. We look forward to engaging discussions, whether online or in person. And I will hand over to our Director of Education, Radha.
Thank you, Enya. Over the last 6 months, the road to Phuket has been paved with thoughtful conversations. Sorry. Oh, there I am. With thoughtful conversations, nuggets of useful information around important work that we need to embark on, and an array of thought-provoking leaders and change makers. And today was no exception. Don't write off the SDG goals, Dr. Guido urges, and take rather a systemic approach, remembering to be solutions-focused, not just critical thinkers. We were reminded that we are privileged as UWCers and that we need to help other schools and move to public good. We have been assured that AI is going everywhere. I didn't know that AI hallucinates. And for this reason, we need schools to be labs so AI can be used under supervision rather than under the table. The AI approach that Ryan urges us to use is reverence, but urgency. And Abby has encouraged us to take powerful moments or sometimes complete breaks to deliberate on what is possible and design one's own learning to gain perspective and to become real. Our students reminded us that working with communities and the youngest children can have a great impact. And they threw down a challenge that Kombili can be a worldwide phenomenon if we all rally behind it. And finally, I want to say a huge thank you and heartfelt, generous applause for the pre-Congress facilitators. Without you, we could never have connected so many people from so many places over the last 6 months. The conversations you curated and summarized so painstakingly have been fed into the discussions at Congress. The movement is grateful for your time, your expertise, and your generous sharing. And to all of you today, thank you for joining us and see you either in person or online. Take care.